Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about another aspect of a rifle that we haven't looked at in a while, and that is my loose approximation of a what would stoner do rifle. Now, some of the stuff I did try to keep more or less the same because I thought it was a good idea, and that one of those items being the Faxon Firearms 16-inch pencil barrel. Now, this is definitely one of the things that separates this build from a lot of the other rifles that I've spent time with. The weight savings that you get with the giant steel rod at the front of your gun in the barrel makes a huge difference in the way that the firearm handles, and is one of the big things that brings this weight down and helps separate this from a lot of the other types of firearms you'll run. Now, with the pencil barrel does potentially come a couple sources of issues in things like accuracy and resistance to heat stress. And I can say that now that I've done some testing with this, including also checking barrel deflection with the silencer, I am very, very happy with this barrel, and I totally understand why people like Ian and Carl over at Range and Forgot Weapons chose this barrel, or this family of barrels, for their What Would Stoner Do projects. Now, in the interest of full disclosure, I did not pay for this barrel. Everything on the rifle itself, not including this optic, but everything on the rifle itself, the receivers, the handguard, the muzzle devices, the flashlight, the triggers, everything I paid for. However, the barrel was provided at no cost by Faxon Firearms. So do with that information what you will. That being said, I will show you all of the testing that I've done when we're talking about it. So I guess check my math if you so like. Now, that being said, the rifle as a whole has probably around 1,400 rounds or so through it. I did a 1,000 round recap when I did the lower receiver, but obviously put a lot more rounds through this thing since then. And again, today we're going to be focusing on the barrel. So let's get into one of the more important things that people always like to talk about when it comes into a barrel. Cut straight to the chase, and let's talk about accuracy. Now, I'm going to be rolling in close-up pictures with the Ballistic X math on these groups here, but these are the groups that I shot at my last range trip. I have shot plenty of other groups with this thing and been very satisfied. And for what it's worth, the optic that I was using is this 1-10 SLX from Primary Arms. This is one of their second focal plane with the ACSS Griffin reticles, but I wanted to give myself as good of opportunity as possible for accuracy. I mostly have a 1X Prism on here if you've seen the other videos on this, but I figured for a test like accuracy, heat deflection, and then deflection with the silencer, having a more magnified optic would definitely aid in that. And then, as you might see from the footage of me shooting these groups, I was also using a bipod, again, just to give myself as good of an opportunity as possible for groups. So I didn't have a ton of different types of ammo out there, but I was mostly shooting Norma 55 grain full metal jacket, some Frontier 55 grain full metal jacket, and then some 77 grain Sierra gold metal match. So starting with the Norma, this is the worst group that we got in these strings of fire. Now, also for what it's worth, I didn't let the barrel like fully cool between groups, but I did give it like a minute or two between groups just to get it back to ambient as close as possible. But in this first 5-shot group, we're looking at about 2.5 inches overall. Then we switch to some Frontier 55 grain. That's the vast majority of what I've shot through this. And I know this thing has put in 1 MOA groups with this ammo before, but nonetheless, we have here a nice tight 4, and including the flyer, we're looking at probably about 1.75 inches. Without that flyer, we're just under 1 inch right there. Again, that seems to be a little bit more emblematic of the groups that I've experienced so far with this, but the full 5 shots, again, are about 1.5 inches. The Norma I had shot before, so I figured that something was weird there, so I went ahead and shot another 5-shot group with a Norma. That put us in at probably about 1.5 inches, 1.25 inches, somewhere. Again, we had a little bit of a flyer off to the right there, just like we did with the Frontier. Without that flyer, we're, again, well under 1 inch. With that flyer, again, probably about 1.5 inches or so. not terrible. And, you know, again, for a pencil barrel, definitely not bad, but I knew that this barrel was capable of more. So I threw in some 77 grain Sierra Match Kings loaded by Federal in their gold medal match line, and we put in 5 shots at right at about an inch. So this thing is definitely capable of 1 MOA if we're talking about putting in ammo that it likes. And again, with the vast majority of the shooting being with that 55 grain Frontier, I know that this thing can do really well even with pretty mid-tier ammo. And again, the worst one there being about 2.5. I would say very easily this is a 1.5 MOA gun, and with the proper ammo, definitely could be sub MOA. Now, one of the things with pencil barrels, and one of the main things that InRange TV tested when they were doing their What Would Stoner Do project, is how much does that pencil barrel affect deflection one way or the other when you heat it up. Because as they point out in their original video, and I'll have links to their videos as well just so you can cross-reference here, when they originally made the M16, it had a pencil barrel, and heat treating then isn't what it is now, and they were seeing pretty significant shifts, even with just the heat generated from firing one magazine in rapid succession. In their testing, there was really effectively no heat deflection. Now, I wanted to put my own little twist on it. Let me grab the target here. So I have been in the process of testing a 50 round drum from KCI, so I figured why not do that. Now, it's also worth mentioning, this is not the first time I've tested this. If you've been following my channel, you know that I tried testing this probably a couple months ago now, and my optic came loose, which totally nullified the test. And then I tried it again, but I didn't have a downrange camera, so I couldn't differentiate what was the beforehand group and the after group. And based on what we got today, the results are very consistent. If I didn't have a downrange camera, it would have been difficult for me to determine where the groups are. So it's good to see that it's repeatable. But what we're looking at here, so and you'll see the footage. Actually, before we get to the target, let me just show you the footage of me shooting the first 5 rounds, doing the mag dump, and then the final 5 rounds, and then we'll talk about what you guys see in that video. Alright, so 50 rounds, for all intents and purposes, as quickly as I can, within reason, and then we'll do the last 5 rounds. Alright, so let's see how that did. I know InRange TV has already done this test, but did 2 more rounds than just 1 full magazine, and more data is always better. So as you guys could tell, I had the first 5 shots in oddly a vertical string, and this was 55 grain Frontier ammo, so same stuff that before we saw printed pretty good. But the 5 shots in probably about just over 2 inches, probably, give or take, maybe right around 2 inches for that 5-shot group. Again, strung out pretty vertically. Then I just dumped 50 rounds as fast as I reasonably could at a steel gong that they have at 200 yards at that range, and then I fired the second 5 rounds. Now, the first 4 of those rounds are more of a horizontal stringing here, just below that initial group. And then the 5th shot, pretty oddly, was just completely off target, and I honestly don't know where it went, so it's hard to quantify that in. But if we're taking into consideration the 4 shots here, the left to right center is pretty similar, maybe at most a ½ inch of shift to the left, and then there was about 1.5 inches, 2 inches of a shift down in the mean point of impact. Now, given that the barrel was pretty freaking hot after 50 rounds dumped as quickly as possible, it's hard to say what was the barrel deflection purely and what could have been contributed to from the mirage, because there was definitely a pretty hefty mirage after doing that dump. But it's well under half of the deflection that they experienced with the old M16 or Colt SP1, I believe is what they were actually using, of like 4.5 inches after a 30-round mag dump. So after 50 rounds, again, almost twice as many rounds, for it to only have maybe at worst 2 inches of deflection, I'm pretty happy with that. And again, this is at 100 yards, just for what that's worth. So all things considered, that's something I was pretty happy with. Now, one of the things that I departed with when it came to what InRange was doing with their What Would Stoner Do project is I did want the ability to mount a silencer to the gun. That's one of the reasons I went with a 16-inch barrel, is just so I could remove muzzle devices a little bit easier. So I have one of my Yankee Hill flash hiders on here to mount my Turbo K. Now, obviously, Turbo K is the smaller version of the White Gem turbos, so not as heavy as some can be. But given how thin the barrel was, I was curious how much deflection I would see by just adding the weight of a silencer to the end of it. And I honestly expected there to be a pretty significant amount of deflection. So I went ahead and tested that. I'm going to grab that target here off camera. And now this group is shot at 50 yards, and I'm going to show you a close-up here. But again, shooting the 55 grain Frontier ammo, I had a nice tight 5-shot cluster, and I was aiming at the bottom of the diamond there, so just a little bit high above my point of aim, and then slap the silencer on there, and then put in 4 shots really tight with one dropped a little bit low and left. Now that could have been me, that could have just been a bad trigger press, but if we talk about the, again, mean point of impact, we're talking, especially with these tight clusters, well under ½ an inch of deflection there. And again, at 50 yards. So we're talking maybe 1 MOA at 100 yards, which is way less than I was expecting, especially considered when I did a similar test with my pretty heavy barrel profiled Remington 700 and 308 with some of the dead air silencers. I was experiencing 1.5 to 2 inch deflections in mean point of impact at 100 yards with that. So this is well within what I would call a reasonable point of impact shift. And if you're using a good QD system, one of the benefits of those is you're getting a very consistent point of impact shift. So as long as you're aware of that, you can very easily accommodate for that. But again, based on this, if your target's within, if you're talking about a man-sized target within 300 yards, it's not going to be enough to actually take you off target. Now, obviously, with different silencers, different attachment systems, your results could be different than that. But in my case, with the YHM can and this barrel shooting 55 grain Frontier ammo, honestly, again, those results are way better than I was expecting. I was honestly expecting like a few inches of movement at 100 yards, or at least the equivalent of a few inches at 100 yards, because of how light this barrel is. But honestly, it did really, really well. And again, this is only a sample of one. So if you know of someone else who's done this test, or if you have done this test with your Faxon pencil barrel, definitely put your results in the comments below, just so people can get a better idea of what they're looking at. So based on the testing I've done, I am exceedingly happy with this barrel. I knew Faxon made high quality barrels. I've been using Faxon barrels for years and years and years. You guys who have been following the channel know that. In fact, my Glock 19 has a Faxon barrel. I've got multiple AR barrels from Faxon. They just make really high quality stuff. So I knew going into this that I would be happy with the results. However, they still performed better than I was expecting going into that, which is always a good thing. And due to that, I can honestly say that if you guys are considering getting a pencil barrel for a build, or really any of their barrels, their gunner barrels, I love that profile and the gunner series from them, you're going to be very, very happy with what you get. Now, if you want to get into the nitty gritty of like what type of finishing they do and all that, you can just go over to Faxon's website. I'll possibly have a link below depending on how YouTube wants to handle things. I might have a link to a place where you can get a link to these barrels on their website so you can actually look more into it. But again, I think the results speak for themselves. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, with the barrel being a huge part of the good handling of a rifle like this, this barrel has really just kind of brought everything together and made this a wonderfully handling gun. I'm honestly very anxious to start using this in 2-gun matches that have started up here locally to me. I've got a couple other guns that I need to run first for other reviews to be able to get some experience with those firearms on the clock. But once those are done, I am very excited to get this thing out because I think this will do very, very well at close and long distances. And now without this optic, just in case you missed the last video I did with the slower receiver, without this optic, going back to my 1X Cyclops, the Gen 2 Cyclops with a QD mount with the Surefire light and everything, this thing is under 6 pounds unloaded. So again, having less weight out front still makes this a very, very light and handy rifle. And honestly, even with a 10x scope on here, still feels really, really nice to run around with, at least on the range. So if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, go and throw that in the comment section down below. I'll try to get back to you as quick as I can. I want to say thanks to my patrons for helping to make a video like this one possible. While Faxon did provide the barrel, the ammo that I put through this thing was definitely not free, so due to the support that I get over on Patreon, I was able to help get the round count up through this, along with just my own contributions to it, to bring this information in front of you guys. So because of that, I post all my content over there early. We have some exclusive content as well. So if any of that stuff sounds interesting, or you just want to support the channel, please feel free to follow the links down in the description for that. But anyway, with all that being said, as always, I hope you got something out of this video, and I really appreciate you watching.